Let him pretty much introduce himself with all the things he's going to talk about, but he is the son of Sue Gorr, who is well known to everyone in the Princeton Historical Society, one of our most valuable members, I'm going to say. Even though I'm not sure she's... She is! She's a member now. All right. Welcome, Sue. All right, take it over.
Cool, thanks. You want me to sit down or stand?
You can do whatever you want.
All right. I suppose I'll probably sit since you're sitting.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. My name is Will Gorr. As far as an introduction, I was born in Princeton in 1991. So, yeah, I grew up in Princeton, and just west of town on County J on a farm. So mom and dad had beef cattle out there, and both were school teachers, and yeah, life was kind of normal, I suppose. I mean, dad.
Did you have brothers or sisters?
I did have one younger brother. He's 3 years younger than me.
Okay.
So Ben is his name, and yeah, he's back around the area now. So that's cool to have him back. So yeah, kind of grew up normal childhood. Played sports, baseball, football, basketball. I played basketball and baseball in Princeton, and then football I ended up playing in Watoma. Pop Warner leagues up there, and so that was kind of all through grade school, and went to Watoma High School, not to Princeton, and kind of intending on playing football. I did not finish playing football there. I did play baseball and that when I was in high school, but so and after high school, I ended up going to Wisconsin Lutheran College in Milwaukee, got a degree in environmental science, and then this will be a corny joke. So my brother and I decided to join the Marine Corps during my senior year of college. So I like to say that I went from an environmental science major to marine biology. So yeah, we enlisted in the Marine Corps together.
You joined together, okay.
We did,
wow.
yeah. So we went in on what is called the buddy program. So you can quite literally go through boot camp with someone. And so that's kind of what we did. So I graduated college on May 18th, 2014, and then on May 19th we shipped out to boot camp to San Diego. So
it was in San Diego?
Yes, it was. So I did that for 4 years. I was in the infantry. I was a rifleman. My route in the Marine Corps was a little bit different than most riflemen. I ended up getting voluntold to go to Washington, D.C., where I ended up finding myself on what's called the silent drill platoon. So we would do precision rifle drill with M1 Garand rifles, and we were the face of the Marine Corps. So we would travel around and represent the Marine Corps as a whole and its core values of honor, courage, commitment. We would perform this precision rifle drill at schools, different community events. We did NFL halftime shows, like all sorts of different stuff. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I ended up going to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, joined an infantry unit there, deployed with them to the South Pacific. So we were on Okinawa, mainland Japan, South Korea, and then I ended up taking a trip to Vietnam for about 10 days, and that was more of an educational trip. That was with 9 other Marines. And so we just visited different battlefields in Vietnam. So that was a pretty unique trip.
Well, now, what years were you?
2014 to 2018.
Okay.
So then, after the Marine Corps, I had about a week in between. Well, about my last year and a half in the Marine Corps, I ended up getting a hold. I knew I was going to get out, and so I'm like, well, what else can I do? Well, I had an internship in Michigan in college with the U.S. Forest Service, and while doing that, I ended up meeting some of the guys who were on the local district's fire crew. So I got what's called my Red Card certification while I was doing the internship, which is basically your certification to be able to fight wildland fire. And so that always kind of stayed in the back of my mind. And so once I knew I was going to get out of the Marine Corps, I'm like, well, why don't I look into wildland fire? And I ended up looking into what is known as a hotshot crew. So I guess backing up a little bit, I wanted to originally be a smoke jumper. So smoke jumper is basically fly in airplanes and jump out of airplanes, parachute in, and they fight fires in the mountains. You can't do that your rookie season because you need fire experience to do that. So I ended up looking into what is called a hotshot crew. A hotshot crew is considered a Type 1 crew, and a Type 1 crew basically means that you have all sorts of qualifications and certain qualifications and certifications that other Type 2 crews do not have, so you get more hazardous assignments, we'll say, on the fire line.
More hazardous than jumping out of an airplane?
Aside from that.
Into a fire.
Yeah.
Into a fire.
Yeah, into a.
Yeah, so I would say, I would argue that hotshots work harder than smoke jumpers, but smoke jumpers have earned that. I mean, they went through the whole hotshot crew realm, and then so they jump fires, and basically if it blows up on them, then they just call in other resources because they can't, they might go in 6 of, I don't know, 10, or I'm not quite sure how the smoke jumpers do it with their teams and squads, but so anyway, I wanted to do something that was difficult, and I'm like, well, I don't want to be on a Type 2 crew, I want to be on a Type 1 hotshot crew, so I got a hold of a couple of superintendents out in Montana through an individual who I called about smoke jumping, and he happened to run a program that placed veterans into wildland fire positions. So I was able to coordinate with him and then a couple superintendents from these hotshot crews, and I ended up getting an opportunity to be on the Helena Hotshots in Montana. So I had about a week from the time I got out of the Marine Corps in 2018 to the time where I needed to be in Helena to start critical training for the hotshot crew.
So the hotshot crew, you're just sort of on basically call, and wherever something happens that you might get called out.
Correct. So you go through 2 weeks of critical training, and once your crew has gotten through critical training, then you go up on the boards, and you are available for various fire assignments. So, and that can be anywhere in the States. So yes, we operated out of Montana, but generally in the early part of fire season, which is starting earlier and ending later nowadays, but generally around like May into early June, you start kind of in the southwest part of the United States. So Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, because those are states that start lighting up first, versus the Northern Rockies in Montana and the Idaho Panhandle, where their fire season generally starts mid-July, give or take, just because of snow melt and things of that nature.
So how many different fires did you go out on?
Probably over the 2 seasons I did it, I would say, I'm gonna say around 20 probably. So the way it works is you get assigned to a fire, you drive to that fire wherever it may be. You have these buggies, we call them buggies, and they hold like 10 guys a piece. So we have 2 of those, our superintendent truck, and then we have a saw truck. So we drive to the fire, and then we are assigned to that fire for about 14 days. That's a typical fire assignment. So you work 16-hour shifts every day for 2 weeks straight, and then you basically pick everything up, drive back to, in our case, Helena, Montana, and then you have 2 days of R&R, and then you would go back up on the boards again. And so you just pretty much did that all fire season until you shut down. So, and they'll be shutting down actually, what's the date today, the 16th, so they probably, if I had to guess the crew that I was on, they're probably on their last fire assignment right now. Maybe they might be done. So, yeah, so I did that for 2 fire seasons, and got to see some awesome country. I mean, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, New Mexico, Colorado, Montana, of course. We fought a fire up in Canada, my second fire season. That one was, when we got there, it was about 750,000 acres, and we went up to Alaska that same year. So yeah, it was a really cool experience, probably the most difficult thing I'll ever do in my life. It's definitely no joke, but
Some close calls?
yeah, and actually, so, obviously when people think of fire in general or firefighting in general, be it structure or wildland, you think that, okay, the fire is what kills you, right? I would say on the wildland fire side of things, and I can't really speak for the structure side, but there are more casualties or incidents and deaths on the fire line based on generally gravity hazards, as we call them. So falling trees, rolling rocks, things of that nature. Not to say people haven't been burned over, because they have been. I mean, entire crews have been burned over in the past. There was such a hot shot crew in 2013, I think it was, down in Arizona, that they all died. So that was the Granite Mountain hot shots. So yes, it happens, but most of the time we're more concerned, I guess, about gravity hazards, because that's kind of most of the time, like, we are in okay positions as long as you have good overhead, and we had good overhead, where, you know, they're not going to put us in any kind of unnecessary, having a brain fart, but
Hazardous
situations.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
So yeah, but yes, I've had a close call. I actually almost had a tree fall on me in Alaska. So I was on my second year. I ran a chainsaw as my primary tool, and so there were different methods of putting in fire lines. So generally, what you would do, you would have 3 to 4 saw teams, and you would create a canopy break, whether that was, you know, up a ridge. Generally, you think ridges, roads, and runways. Ridges, roads, and runways. Yeah, rivers. That's the other one. But ultimately, you know, you're finding a location for that fire break that makes sense with the topography and which way, kind of all the environmental factors that go into fighting this wildfire. So you're putting in, it could be a 40-foot canopy break, it could be a 100-foot canopy break, and whatever is in that canopy break, or that needs to be, I mean, everything goes. I mean, and that can be trees as big as this, around as this table, or it can be brush. And so, like, the sawyer's job is to cut all of it and move it. You would do that in a number of ways. You would have what would be considered a progressive cut, where the first team would start, and they would say it was a 40-yard canopy break. They would take the first 10 feet, and they would get so far ahead, and then your second team would come along, and they would take the next 10 feet, so on and so forth, until you had that 40 feet. Otherwise, we would leapfrog. So first team, second team starts up here, you bump into where the first team started, and keep going. So we ended up in Alaska. The firefighting is a little bit different because it's all tundra. So we would put in canopy breaks, but we wouldn't take fire line because it's all tundra. It's all hose lays up there. So we would be running or laying down a lot of hose and using that. Whereas in the Rocky Mountains, I mean, when you're way up there, you oftentimes don't have access to water, with the exception of airplanes and so water tankers and bucket truck or bucket drops from helicopters and things like that. In Alaska, you're laying hose a lot of times. So I think we had 7 or 8 saws running that day, just because we could. And so there were a couple folks who, everybody knows how to run a chainsaw on hot shot crew, but not everyone is assigned to them. So, and then naturally, like, if you're not assigned to a saw, and then you get assigned a saw for a day, then you're going to have another saw partner who is not generally running a chainsaw either, and then you put those two together and are not necessarily used to working with one another on a chainsaw. So the way we would do it for that, if I was cutting, I would cut a tank of fuel in the chainsaw, and my partner would swamp for me, or take all of the brush and move the brush to what's called the green side. That's the side that you don't want to burn, the black side being the side that will burn. So my buddy Tannen he was cutting that tank. I was swamping for him, and then there were a couple of our crew members behind us who weren't used to working with one another on a chainsaw. And we were in these black spruce, and ultimately I heard one of my crew just start yelling, and I looked back and there was a tree coming right at me, and I just fell backwards into the tundra. I don't think it would have killed me. It was probably a 20 or 30 foot black spruce. There's a lot of black spruce up there. And I mean, it probably wouldn't have felt good, but so yeah, that was probably my closest call. But we had other guys who actually the very first day of the very first fire I was on, my saw partner. The first year, he was on a different saw team, and he ended up, him and his saw partner actually almost got whacked by a live aspen that just came down, and actually hit the chainsaw out of one of their hands.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, gravity hazards. Long story, but gravity hazards are a little bit more concerning generally, as long as you're in a decent position on the fire line than the fire itself.
Okay.
So, yes, but yeah, it was a really cool experience. We worked really hard and saw some awesome stuff, and I definitely wouldn't trade that for that experience for the
Yeah,
world. I mean,
wow.
it was pretty.
So 2 years of that,
Yep.
and
Then after that, that was, I guess, the first year of that thing which shall not be named. But yeah, so 2020, that thing. Yeah. So I was kind of in between jobs. I was in the hiring process. I wanted to come home, ultimately. And I was in the hiring process for the Milwaukee Police Department and the Madison Fire Department. Ultimately, I turned down the Milwaukee Police Department to pursue the Madison Fire Department. That's kind of further ahead. But in the meantime, while I was specifically first in the Milwaukee hiring process, I was doing various landscaping, excavating around here, and then some of my own tree work, since I'm like, well, I kind of learned to have the skill set from the fire line running a chainsaw. It's like, I can cut trees down. Probably won't hit people's houses, so. But, yeah, so I started doing that, and then in the meantime, I also, I was up in Alaska for about a month on a commercial salmon boat as well. And that was on the Bering Sea in Bristol Bay.
so that's like the hazard catch guys you watch on TV.
Yeah, so if
that
you've
kind of
seen
stuff.
Deadliest Catch
Yeah.
on Discovery Channel, I think it is. So it's kind of similar. So actually, some of those boats that you see on there, we would offload our catch to those boats because that's not crabbing season. They're out, doing their thing during crabbing season, but those boats have to operate. Those big boats have to operate year round in order to, well, pun intended, I guess, stay afloat financially.
Right.
So, during salmon season, commercial salmon season, they're considered tenders. So they basically anchor along these fishing zones, and then after every fishing period, every day, all these fishing vessels will come, tie up to them, and then they'll offload their catch, and in turn, these tenders will take the salmon to the canning factories, and then they'll come back and.
So were they netting salmon? Were you actually
Yes.
getting a chance to reel them in?
No, we're netting them. So I mean, we had I think we had 1,200 feet worth of net off the back of our 32-foot boat. And it's a unique experience up there. Yeah, it's like the Wild West. I mean, that's how people make money up there. So I mean, a lot of time, if the prices are good on any given year, up there that year it wasn't because of that thing. But sometimes you can get like $1.50 to $2.50 a pound, and some of these boats will bring in 400,000 pounds of fish. So do the math. I can't do it because I eat crayons for snacks, but
Almost a million.
yeah. So there's a lot of money in it, and so people they're very possessive of the areas that they're fishing. I mean, people are flipping each other off and pulling guns on people. I never saw the guns, but I've heard stories. Because
So like if you're dragging your net through an area that person thinks that they should be.
yep, you cut them off or something like that. I mean, fights have started, guns have been fired. I mean, I've heard some pretty crazy stories and seen some crazy stuff up there too. But yeah, so we ended up, our season ended up getting cut short. Generally, I think it's about a 6 to 8 week season, but we got hit by another boat. So we were actually working on a piece of equipment one day, and because of another incident that turned out into a medical incident, but I'll start with that actually. So our crew was actually pretty green. I was in the Marine Corps and a hot shot and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't have any sea experience, if you will. So it was me as a greenhorn. We had this cocky 16-year-old kid as another deckhand, and we had a 15-year-old kid who just was kind of clueless about life. And then we had our captain. And ultimately, we were fishing one day, and there's a big drum on the deck of the boat, and that's where your net gets wound up. It's a big spool. In the front of that is a set of forks on a shaft with a turnkey, and these forks move via hydraulics back and forth along this shaft in front of the drum, so that when it's essentially a fishing reel. So like as you're running the hydraulics to bring that net back in, that level line in front is moving back and forth, and it's evenly distributing the netting onto the drum. So in this, the forks are about that tall. There's two of them, and then they're on this bar in front with the turnkey. And so we had just gotten all of our net out, and once the net comes to the end, generally we would unhook the net from the drum, and then we would hook it up to a tow line which was connected to the mast of the boat. That allowed us to kind of maneuver the net a little bit more, appropriately. So anyway, it was a 100-foot tow line. We had planned on cutting it down or cutting it shorter. We just hadn't gotten to that point yet. But anyway, there was a lot of slack that was built up on the boat, on the deck of the boat from that tow line as we clipped that net into that tow line. So I was on the back of the boat. The 16-year-old would have been on the right, the starboard side, the right side. I was on the back left or port side, and then the 15-year-old, he was bleeding fish. So when you caught fish and you got them out of the nets, we called it fish picking. You pick them out of the nets, and then you would generally rip a gill and then throw them in the fish holds so that they would bleed out and the meat wouldn't bruise. So he was doing that. So he had no idea this was coming. But ultimately, my captain all of a sudden yelled something, and I looked back, and the slack of the tow line picked up, and it went taut, and it caught the pivot joint where that level line sat in front of the drum, and it flipped this level line into the air. And this is probably about 60 pounds worth of welded metal, and it came down right on the 15-year-old's head. And he just folded up like a wet noodle. So I'm thinking like, oh cool, I just watched a kid die. That's great. So I crawled over to him, and I turned him over, and his face was all swollen on one side. He got hit on the right side. The left side of his face was drooped. He was slurring his speech. So I'm like, okay, he's not dead, but now he's gonna die in my arms. That's cool. But ultimately, we were able to get him where he needed to go. He got flown out, got flown to Anchorage, and then he was back to work the next day. So, and his parents were okay with that. But they're a different breed up there. Like that's what they do. So they kind of expect those things to happen because people die up there every year during fishing season. It's just that lifestyle. So anyway, so there was that, and then we had the incident with the boat. So we were actually, that's why I backed up to that first. So we were fixing the level line as a result of it getting bent probably on Ethan's head. We were working on that. It was a bluebird day. We were anchored. It was a fishing period. So they have different fishing periods every day. So they might have a 4-hour window where you can fish. They might have a 12-hour window where you can fish. Eventually, once they believe, and they monitor the amount of fish that get into the rivers very closely, because they want to have enough fish that get up there so they can spawn, and then in turn they'll maintain that fishery. But once they believe that enough have gotten up there, then they'll open up the season 24/7 until they shut it down, basically. So you might have multiple hours or multiple periods in a day of fishing. So you might have 4 hours on, 4 hours off, 8 hours on, 4 hours off. Just kind of depended upon what they were feeling like, I guess, that day. But So it was a fishing period, so most of the fishing vessels were gone. We were anchored, it was a bluebird day, it was not rough winds, or it wasn't rough at all, winds were low. And we were anchored where we were supposed to be anchored, where all the fishing vessels anchored generally, and then you had tender row where all the big boats would anchor. And the 15-year-old was running hydraulics for us, while the other kid, my captain, and I were on our hands and knees on the deck of the boat, and we were working on this level line. All of a sudden, the kid running hydraulics just says, "Oh my God," and I looked up, and all of a sudden there's this big boat that's coming towards us. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, we're gonna get hit. And a few seconds later, sure enough, we did. And fortunately, it hit us that boat hit us with just the back left corner. I mean, you could see the boat swinging its rear end towards us, so I'm guessing whoever it was wasn't paying attention, and it's like, oh crap, well, there's a boat there, we gotta move. So they're cranking it to the right, and if they would have hit us with another few feet of their hull, I mean, we probably would have been in a drink. But it opened us up just above waterline on the left bow. We went down into the hold and checked it out, and there was just a little bit of water coming in. So we ended up anchoring or tying up to that boat, and then we patched it quick. And then the following day, they ended up escorting us back to a place called Naknek where we put in, and that was the end of our fishing season ultimately. So, it was crazy. The boat that hit us was probably 130 to 50 feet long, and our boat, like I said, was 32 feet long. So, Foxy Lady.
Foxy Lady.
That's who hit us. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So.
You've had a lot of very adventurous careers.
Yeah.
We haven't even got the police word yet.
No, we haven't. Yeah, so then I did policing after I didn't get hired with Madison. I decided to look at further law enforcement or fire jobs, and I saw that Princeton was hiring an officer, and so ultimately I applied, and I was fortunate enough to get hired as a police officer in my hometown. So I've been doing that for just over 2.5 years now.
Okay.
And I love working here.
How big is the police force? I don't have a lot of first-hand experience with it. So.
Yeah, it's a good thing. So we have 4. We have chief, myself, another officer, and then we have a school resource officer.
Okay.
And so that's where we are at, fully staffed right now. And
Is someone there 24 hours a day, or like you work different shifts?
Yeah, so we do work different shifts. Chief works a little bit different hours than we do, but ultimately there is coverage for, in some way, shape, or form, for that entire 24-hour period. Yeah, every day. So, but it's, I can't complain about the schedule. I can't complain about the calls as far as the volume of calls. I mean, Princeton's fortunately, we live in a very, knock on wood, but a very safe community, and that's nice. I think a lot of new law enforcement or young law enforcement officers want to cut their teeth in larger departments. I didn't really feel the need to do that, I guess, because I did other things.
You already did a bunch of hazardous stuff.
Yeah, and so, but Princeton still, being a law enforcement officer in general still allows you the opportunity, I guess, to still have excitement and adrenaline rushes and all that kind of stuff, and so I enjoy that, but I also can appreciate working in a community where you kind of know everybody, and heck, sometimes the community finds stuff out before we do. It's like, good and bad, but it's cool to be able to drive around and talk with people who you know, and just be able to help out the community in a positive way. And not everybody would agree with the whole positive way thing, I suppose, but it's in their best interest most of the time.
So I would imagine that every Saturday the flea market's here. That's a whole bunch of people come in. And does that make for eventful Saturdays? And now you're kind of getting into like, Saturdays aren't going to be as eventful.
Yeah, we always, generally there will be an officer who is out and about on Saturday mornings, especially during the heat of the summer, or flea market. So just because there's so much traffic that comes into town.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think we've all seen that traffic has gotten backed up way past BP, and so we do our best. And quite frankly, I mean, the security firm that we have working traffic this year, I mean, they've done a very good job. But sometimes we do have to get out there and just get cars going, just get them moving as fast as we can. Because I mean, I know I don't like it when I'm not working and all of a sudden I'm in a traffic jam in Princeton. I mean, who wants that? But sometimes it's just out of your control because
Right.
there's just so many people coming in.
Yeah.
But then you just make people wait at the crosswalks, you know, and make them wait for 5 or 10 minutes just so you can get
Yeah.
the traffic moving.
Right.
They might not like it, but it's more important that we just get traffic moving. So, yeah. So it's exciting. I enjoy working in Princeton. I really do.
Okay.
And I don't have any intent of going anywhere.
Well, good.
So
We like having you.
I appreciate
So
it.
what are some of the props that you brought? Is that?
Yeah, so this I just brought to, you know, in case anyone got a little bit rowdy, I can do it. So this is a tool that we as Sawyers carried on a fire crew. This is called a pound ski. So it's actually a Pulaski. Pulaski being it's supposed to have an axe head here and then the adze end. So I mean, you can cut, you know, primarily roots and stuff and whatever else you have to, and then you got the grub end when you're digging fire line. So fire line is generally 18-inch wide, scrape down a mineral soil. So like the cut goes through, and then you basically put an 18-inch scrape, a line, for as long as you need to on the back third of that cut. Because that's what, if you have to conduct burning operations, then you need a place to start that fire on the ground so it doesn't, you know,
Right.
get where you don't want it to go,
Right, yeah.
basically. So this we carried the pound ski. It's literally a Pulaski that's got the axe end cut off and then this plate welded on so we can pound wedges into trees and stuff
Okay.
when we're cutting them down.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, and then if we needed to dig anything, we could use the adze end for that. So if you can pass it around if you want. It's nothing crazy, but so, but yeah,
Manure forks and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
No trouble.
But yeah, I mean, these are just some pictures and stuff. I mean, if anybody wants to look at them, you're more than welcome to. I think there's a few Marine Corps pictures in this one, but most of this is all firefighting. So I personally like to take pictures and then I will print pictures out and I'll write on the back like where I was, who I was with, when it was. So I try to get them off my phone as quickly as I can, just
Wow.
so.
Wow.
I
But,
envy you.
yeah, so you're welcome to look through that if you want. But yeah, so I wasn't quite sure what to bring for prompts. So.
No, that's perfect.
I thought about bringing my chainsaw in here, but it's all greasy.
I have a question, Will.
Sure.
So, that fire line is only 18 inches wide?
So the line itself, let me see, and there's